members who spoke. I'd like to welcome the presenters to the subcommittee. I have a number of fairly specific questions. In Mr. Mahoney's presentation, he sort of talked about, you know, treating a potential detriment as turning it to its advantage, and you know, our inshore fish. I mean, a large, as is quite clear. I mean, a very large proportion of the Irish fishing vessels are under 10 metres. I mean, we've 1,614 of them, and the inshore fishing sector is generally compliant, was how you described it in your presentation. There's a culture of compliance. People land their fish, they go out for no more than 24 hours, and they go after high value stocks. So, you know, as a result of that, of course, that the fish is fresh. It hasn't been frozen like it would be on factory ships. But does that not present an opportunity to the state maybe to market that, and to get that, to market that both in Ireland but also internationally, and to develop strategies to get those fish to international markets, like the bigger international markets in Europe, where there's a demand for that? And I just wonder, what is BIM doing at the moment? BIM specifically, but if anybody else wishes to provide answers, I obviously welcome it. But what is being done by state agencies at the moment with the view to marketing that specific product and getting that specific product to market? SFPA, you mentioned that you have inspection points to certify your exports. Where are they located? Which airports, which ports? And who's certifying shellfish, and in particular live shellfish, which are imported? And where are they being certified? Again, going back to the presentation of Mr. Hooley of BIM, we learned that the sea fish landings at Irish ports were valued at 199 million euros, and output from the aquaculture sector was valued at 129 million euros. And I suppose I wonder, what of your budget, what proportion of it is geared towards the marketing and development of sea fish versus the marketing and development of aquaculture? A couple of very specific questions, if you don't mind. I understand that, and thank you for your for providing us with this chart, I suppose, of minimum sizes that fishermen can bring on board with them. I understand that these minimum sizes are legislated for by way of statutory instrument on the recommendation of, is it BIM, or if not, who? Then the next question would be, is there any, they're obviously done with a view to protecting fisheries and ensuring the sustainability and that fisheries can regenerate. Is there any protection of velvet crab fisheries in particular, any minimum sizes applicable to velvet crab fisheries? If not, why not? And then finally, you seemed, Mr. Keating had information on salmon specifically and salmon stocks in rivers. How is there a trend, and if so, what is it with relation to the River Shannon upstream of the Partine Weir?
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Who wants to lead off this time? Mr. Con
there was one last question, and that was going back to the, I suppose, sorry if you don't mind. You mentioned BIM in your presentation, Mr. Hooley. The need to realise scale is an important consideration for our sector, and I suppose with regard to that, obviously there's a particular proposal going to the department now, which we won't be discussing here, but there's a more broad strategy of developing, I understand, a broader strategy that BIM has of developing large fish farms, offshore fish farms. I suppose the question is there a possibility of displacing existing fisheries by doing that? And not talking about a specific, I'm talking about the general policy of displacement. could it be counterproductive? I mean, if we're seeking to develop in the way that Irish beef has very much been marketed as a top-end product, if we're seeking to market fish, particularly the type of fish that I mentioned, which is, comes from inshore fisheries, is that at odds with developing and marketing a more mass product from these large sea farms? And are there any health repercussions for humans, through swimming, etc., or has that been considered as part of the process?
The fishermen in general want to fish. They're not marketing experts, particularly inshore fishers. They're not marketing experts. They're people who want to go out, catch fish, come back, sell that fish on that day, go out and do it again tomorrow. In general terms, that has resulted in entry into what's largely a world commodity market rather than a niche market that Deputy McNamara has referred to as Irish beef. I think what we might need rather than legislation is perhaps awareness and an appetite for that. It's fair to say local is the new organic, I think, is the best way I could put the consumers' increasing desire for low carbon miles. And the proximity of Ireland, Paul has shown a map of Ireland's proximity to the rich natural fishing resources. The proximity of Irish fishers, the lower amount of diesel Irish fishers have to use to get fish from that rich natural resource is a marketing point that might have benefits. We're obviously in the middle of a recession, but the high end of food market seems to be relatively recession-proof, and perhaps that's something we could be looking at.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, the Deputy McNamara's questions, if I could move on to those. We're around imports and exports of seafood and our role in import and export in seafood. So your direct questions, where are we influencing the official controls of export of seafoods? That's done at the processing plant in Ireland, which is a huge logistical challenge for us to go to each processing plant for each consignment, because the legal obligation to inspect for the certification involves inspection of consignment. So we physically drive to each processing plant each time they have a consignment going to each country. So that's where that is done. I hope that's answering that particular question. As regards imports, then, imports of food to the European Union are a matter that attract particular scrutiny at an EU level, because it's entry to the entire EU. Once it comes into Ireland, it can come into anywhere in the EU, and conversely, if it comes into Rotterdam, which is the largest import port in Europe, it can come into Europe from there. So we have two border inspection ports in Ireland: Dublin Port, not Dublin Airport, Dublin Port and Shannon Airport are the two designated border inspection ports in Ireland. Ireland is a net exporter of food rather than net importer. European Union is a net importer of food, indeed the largest importing bloc for seafood on the planet. In round terms, about 1 in 5 consignments of food which arrives in Dublin port is seafood, in round terms. I don't have exact figures, so Deputy, I can certainly get them if necessary. We don't physically work at the border inspection ports in Ireland. We provide technical support for the Department of Agriculture, who provide the manning at those ports. Your question was who inspects this seafood imported into Ireland, I think, particularly shellfish. There aren't really, and I'm going to be absolute, there aren't really live shellfish coming into Ireland. Represented from the Irish Shellfish Association here today. There aren't really live shellfish coming to Ireland. Probably we're a net exporter of shellfish. In fact, very little of live shellfish we produce here, in fact, consumed here. There are certainly dead shellfish, processed shellfish, particularly tiger prawns, Bangladeshi tiger prawns in particular, and Canadian lobster, frozen lobster coming in. But they're not live. So they are coming into the border inspection ports. Who inspects those? Again, it's a reciprocal relationship where the onus is upon the exporting country to provide the attestations, which are then verified at the border inspection port by the Department of Agriculture staff, with direct support from us as regards seafood.
So that has to be at the Dublin Port or Shannon Airport?
If Ireland is the point of entry to the EU, it has to be at a border inspection port, but it could conceivably enter the EU in Rotterdam, for instance, which is highly likely, and then come in Clare, Cork Airport, any entry port to Ireland. It doesn't have to be border inspection ports. The parlance is the border inspection port is known as the BIP, so it gets BIP'd in Rotterdam, and then it's in the EU. It's free trade within the EU. It's a basic principle of the common market.
Mr. Woolley next, I think, yeah.
Thanks, Chairman. In reverse order, I'll be very brief, if I can. Deputy McNamara raised the issue of scale again, similar to Deputy O'Keefe, and maybe the inconsistency of scale versus niche. I think it's important to understand where we are as a country in terms of seafood and where we need to get to. Unfortunately, a vast majority of our seafood is sold in a commodity format, and we unquestionably need to move away from that. The future for the majority of Irish seafood must be in niche, high-value production. But we must also set that in context. I mentioned during my presentation or opening statement about 35,000 tonnes of aquaculture product coming out of Ireland in 2012. The European market now, just the European market for seafood, is about 55 billion euros per annum, 15 million tonnes. Okay, so Europe alone, in terms of what it offers from a market perspective, can just take everything Ireland produces on a slow day, effectively. You know, so that's the scale of the opportunity just in Europe alone. So even if we were, for example, on organic salmon, doubling our organic production that's going into the niche at the moment, the impact on the market and the overall context is very, very minimal. Absolutely no health considerations for swimming around aquaculture or farm salmon of any description. Absolutely none, categorically. On the marketing and development of sea fish versus aquaculture, it's important to note that the marketing and promotion of Irish seafood is under the remit of our colleagues in Board BIA. From a business development perspective, BIM actively engage with the seafood sector. So we're involved in issues like value-added processing and assisting our processors to scale up and to create more value-added products for international and domestic markets. In addition, we have a dedicated seafood development centre, the only one in Ireland dedicated to the delivery of value-added products for Irish seafood companies, from small companies to very large companies. And that centre in Clonakilty has proved very successful in adapting a traditionally commodity-type focused product into a more value-added niche that is proving lucrative for many Irish companies. On the budget, Deputy McNamara asked the budget split from a BIM perspective. Fisheries and aquaculture, fisheries and training budget for 2013, capital and current amounted to a total of 2.32 million versus an aquaculture budget of 1.4 million. Okay. My colleague, Mr. Keating, will deal with Deputy Pringle's issue with regard to inshore fishermen and how we can structure them in such a fashion take advantage of aquaculture. And my colleague, Mr. Maguire, will deal with the potential for aquaculture that Deputy Harrington raised.
Thank you. Developing access to markets and trying to, I mean, is there any work being done to?
Yeah, I think Board BIA are doing very good work in that regard. And
transport infrastructure.
Transport infrastructure.
Transport infrastructure. I mean, to get our, I mean, how are Irish fish, if they're caught in a very small, you know, I mean, I'll take Quilty as an example, but I mean, a small pier in Cork or Galway, if they're, I mean, how do they get from there to market, or is there anything being done?
I think there's the physical infrastructure required to transport the raw material to the market, and allied to that is the actual route to market, as in the vehicle, not a physical vehicle, but the business model that takes the product to market. And we would focus very much on the physical infrastructure on the processing side, for example, where we assist companies financially to introduce new machinery, for example, that would add to the shelf life of some of that raw material. So rather than trying to ship a live raw material out of the country, we can develop value-added products with these companies to ensure that there's a longer shelf life for them and access greater markets and more distant markets. Secondly, on the actual commercial vehicle, the route to market, we have a very successful route to market scheme available to all Irish seafood companies and collectives, whereby I gave the example earlier where we had 4 companies from around the country in actual fact dealing with shellfish and crab specifically, and live crab, now exporting as one into a Chinese market of 1.3 billion consumers that they would not have had a hope of doing as individuals. We've also got another example of two companies, again dealing with live inshore products, doing something similar. So that's the type of commercial vehicle that we can help facilitate through our schemes and through the expert advice from our staff in Bord Iascaigh.
Mr. Keating?
I'd like to just touch on Deputy McNamara's question in relation to wild salmon. These figures come from the report of the Standing Scientific Committee, so they're not BIM figures per se. Unfortunately, there is no figure in it for the Shannon above Parteen, but it wouldn't be for me, as opposed to discuss this with this committee. Rather, I could maybe direct you towards the Standing Scientific Committee, who should make their full report available to you. I think the real point I was trying to extract is that there is a considerable number of wild salmon that are now available beyond the conservation limit, many of which are correctly exploited by the sea angling sector. However, there remains the opportunity for the previous wild catching sector, and in particular those who didn't avail of the buyout, to access some of these fish. I think it is an important point. I do recognise the specific difficulty that attaches to Arranmore because of its geographical location, but the wider point is more important to me, that there are scientifically assessed surplus fish, and I think we should be in a position to ensure, whether through diversification projects or otherwise, there is an access to those fish amongst wild fishermen.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll do my best to try and address the questions raised both by Deputy Harrington and Deputy McNamara about the potential within aquaculture, the need to try and maintain the value of the particular products coming from it, and also the particular question as to why, for example, the Scottish salmon industry now running at about 160,000 tonnes, which started at about the same time as ours, why they've been more successful in terms of getting their volume up. I suppose, first of all, with regard to the question raised that if we are ultimately successful in building up one or more of these larger scale offshore farms, are we in danger of somehow undervaluing the product from them? I suppose the answer to that is no, because the intention is that these would be organic certified farms. And BIM, along with the industry, has led the way in developing organic certification. And in fact, we still maintain a number of national standards, very high quality product certification standards to ISO 65, both to ensure quality, traceability, environmental sustainability, organic status, and for example, recently, hopefully, the bottom-grown mussel sector will gain Marine Stewardship Council certification. So we're all the time working on ways of finding market niches and supporting the industry through doing that. With regard to the potential from aquaculture, in the immediate to medium term, the targets for that are set out in Food Harvest 2020, and they're quite ambitious, but we believe they're achievable. There is a difficulty with licensing, and I think it's that issue with licensing that is essentially the difference between Scotland and Ireland. The Scots got off to a roaring start with salmon farming, and in many ways it's a function of the fact that the ownership of the foreshore in Scotland is vested in the Crown Estate Commissioners, a rather ancient body, but nevertheless one with a very strong commercial imperative, who took a decision that they really wanted to push this industry hard. Also, in the hinterland of the Highlands of Scotland, the land ownership is very different to here in Ireland. It's owned in general by a very small number of people in very large estates. At the time, they also were enjoying income from this particular industry. So it got up to a critical mass very quickly with very little local opposition. And also they had a very rapid licensing system in place. Because of, I think, confusion and difficulties, the industry in Ireland became embroiled in confusion over the whole sea lice issue, the famous rod license debate, and it got snarled up back at that stage, and it never really got past a starting point because of difficulties with perception around the industry. Unfortunately, in the interim, the 2007 judgment of the European Court of Justice against Ireland, which found that our aquaculture licensing system was essentially delinquent insofar as it didn't properly take account of the Birds and Habitats directives. There was a flaw in our system, and as colleagues from the other agencies have described, the state side of things, including BIM and all the agencies here, have been playing a scramble, a catch-up to try and bring our system back into full compliance. And to some extent, to answer Deputy O'Keefe's question about who the competent authority is, the issue here is that the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine is the consenting authority. And as the consenting authority, the onus falls on it to then satisfy the requirements of the directives. To satisfy the requirements of the directives requires us to be able to carry out appropriate assessments in accordance with the directives. And of course the difficulty then was when we went to go and do that, we found that the necessary information and structures weren't in place to be able to do it. So there's been a very grave difficulty in bringing the state into compliance with these issues. Progress is being made, but it's very, very slow. And I think we're all very frustrated by that, and I include even the officials in the department who suffer the same frustration. But there's no way around it. We must deal with this matter and get it out of the way. But it will be crucial to get it out of the way if we are to achieve the targets set out in Food Harvest 2020.
Question about aquaculture and the whole area of research into aquaculture, sea lice issue. Yes, the Marine Institute published scientifically on various aspects of sea lice interactions, and we do publish in peer-reviewed scientific journals. IFI do similar, and there has been a lot of what I would call my science and your science trying to justify things. But I would be very reluctant to comment any further on that, because at the moment the Marine Institute are reviewing the EIS for the Galway Bay aquaculture. And because it's a statutory process, I would prefer if I didn't make any further comment on that.
McNamara.
A very good question for Mr. Hooley, which I asked before, with regard to the scale which we've. Sorry? No. Whether there would be displacement was my.
Oh, sorry, displacement.
I was here actually when he addressed the previous one, but whether there was likely to be displacement of existing fisheries, albeit smaller fisheries.
Displacement or replacement?
Just to clarify the question, the displacement of existing salmon producers or displacement of existing inshore fishermen or other activities?
Inshore fishermen or, for example, crab, lobster, etc.
Yeah.
Or mackerel, whatever.
Yeah, we've worked very closely and have had numerous meetings with regard to the specific application with various inshore fishing groups in our offices in Galway, and sat down with the individuals. And prior to us conducting our environmental impact statement, we embarked on a comprehensive scoping exercise. And the purpose of that scoping exercise and the meetings that we held with the inshore fishermen before conducting the EIS was to identify issues from their perspective that they felt were required to be considered in our EIS that accompanied our subsequent application. So we're very comfortable that issues that they raised, for example, around the spawning of shrimp in the vicinity, about the spawning grounds for herring and for whiting, we discussed this with the scientific experts in the Marine Institute, and we're very comfortable that there is not a significant impact on the inshore fishing activities because of this farm. And in fact, the practice and custom and practice of other fish farms around the coast is that inshore fishermen have actually very little ground taken up from these farms, because they can shoot their pots right up to the actual anchors of these cages. And that can be seen right around the coast with other salmon cages, for example, be it in Clare Island or in other areas around the coast. So we're very comfortable that there won't be displacement. But it's important to understand that when you're embarking on a project of this nature and this scale, it is not without impact. But we're comfortable that we have done everything possible to try and minimise that impact on the inshore fishermen, and we will continue to work with them if we are lucky and successful in our application. We will continue to work with them to ensure that any minimal impact that might occur is augmented by other measures, and we've discussed those measures and potential mitigating factors with them, and we will look to implement those in the model that we envisage moving forward with this project.
Just one last question. Is there any other country embarking on a similar, or that's now proposing to embark on a similar project at this scale? I mean, obviously things have happened in the past, but that's now going ahead with.
It's interesting should raise that issue. Obviously, we're starting from a very disadvantaged position vis-à-vis our international competitors, be it Scotland on 160,000 tonnes, Norway on 1.2 million, Chile on 350,000 tonnes, or Faroes on 50,000 tonnes. So we're at a considerable disadvantage. We recently attended a major international seafood conference in Norway and presented our case and what we are doing as a country from an offshore aquaculture perspective. And in the words of the organiser, where 600 delegates attended from over 40 different countries, there is going to be a dedicated session next year at that international event on our plans for offshore aquaculture, because they see us as world leaders in this regard. And what we're trying to achieve here, they believe that many other nations are now going to try and copy us. Indeed, some of our competitors from Scotland have already been in contact to see if they can get access to our plans, because they're very excited about what's happening and they see it as groundbreaking ambition and vision for the sector, and they want to copy us.